I walked into my apartment on a Tuesday evening, my arms full of groceries from Whole Foods, and immediately knew something was wrong. The smell was different. Cologne mixed with something unfamiliar, like another person's presence had seeped into the walls. My stomach dropped before my brain even caught up to what my instincts were screaming. The living room couch had been rearranged. My cream-colored sectional now faced a different direction, and there was a beer bottle on the coffee table. Not my brand. I stood frozen in the doorway, grocery bags hanging from my wrists like dead weight. The keys in my pocket suddenly felt heavy, accusatory, as if I had no right to be holding them in my own home. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. Nothing. I moved deeper into the apartment, setting the groceries down on the kitchen counter with shaking hands. That's when I heard it. The sound of water running from the master bedroom bathroom. My bedroom. Someone was taking a shower in my apartment like they lived here. My name is Michael Turner, and I'm a 34-year-old structural engineer living in Arlington, Virginia. I'd bought this one-bedroom apartment 3 years ago, right after my promotion and my divorce from Sarah finalized. It was my fresh start, my sanctuary, the first place in my entire adult life that belonged solely to me. I'd saved aggressively for the down payment, putting away 15% of my salary for 2 years straight. The mortgage was $2,100 a month, and every single payment felt like a small victory, a tangible piece of my independence. My brother Brandon was supposed to stay with me for maybe a week, maybe 2 at most. He'd called me in early September, his voice tight and desperate in a way I'd never heard before. "Mike, I'm in a really bad spot," he'd said over the phone while I was sitting at my desk at the firm, pretending to review blueprints. "Jennifer kicked me out. She's keeping the house. I don't have anywhere to go, and I can't afford a hotel right now. Can I crash at your place just for a little bit? I promise it's temporary." Brandon is 2 years younger than me, and we'd always been close growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina. He'd been my best man at my wedding to Sarah, though that marriage had imploded spectacularly in year 5. When he asked for help, I didn't hesitate. I said yes immediately. That was the first mistake. The water stopped running. I stood in my kitchen like an intruder in my own space, listening to the sounds of someone moving around in my bedroom. Footsteps, a door opening, the distinct sound of my bedroom closet sliding open. My hands were clenched so tightly that my fingernails were digging crescents into my palms. Brandon emerged from the bedroom 5 minutes later wearing my clothes. Not metaphorically, literally wearing my charcoal gray Columbia fleece that I'd gotten for Christmas from my mother 2 years ago. His wet hair was combed back, and he was barefoot on my hardwood floors, leaving damp prints as he walked toward the kitchen where I stood waiting. "Oh, hey, man," he said, his expression shifting from surprise to something that looked almost like guilt, but not quite. "Not enough. Didn't expect you home so early. I was just grabbing a quick shower. Long day at the temp agency? They're trying to find me something full-time." I stared at him without responding. The silence stretched between us like a living thing. "Come on, Mike, don't look at me like that," Brandon continued, moving past me to open the refrigerator like he owned it. He pulled out one of the craft beers I'd been saving, a limited edition IPA from a brewery in Maryland that I'd specifically bought for a dinner party I was planning for Friday night. He opened it without asking, took a long sip, and exhaled contentedly. "It's not a big deal. I've been staying here for 2 weeks already, and you haven't even noticed. Everything's fine." 2 weeks. He'd been here for 2 weeks, and I'd only been home for dinner twice since he arrived. I'd stayed late at the office most nights, working on a big commercial development project in Falls Church. I'd barely spent time in my own apartment. The realization hit me like a punch to the sternum. He'd been here, making himself at home, while I'd been elsewhere, completely unaware of how my space had been colonized. "Brandon, we talked about this," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice level. "You said a week, maybe 2. We set a timeline. What are you still doing here?" He took another sip of my beer, and something flickered across his face. A hardness, a defensiveness that seemed disproportionate to the question. "The timeline changed, Mike. Life happened. Jennifer won't return my calls. Her lawyer is being a nightmare about the custody arrangement for Madison, and I need more time to figure things out. I can't afford a place right now. Surely you can understand that. We're brothers. Family helps family. Madison was his 8-year-old daughter with Jennifer. They'd been married for 9 years before everything fell apart. I did understand, or at least I thought I did, but something in his tone, something in the way he was standing in my kitchen in my clothes, drinking my beer, like he had every right to be there. It made my skin crawl. Okay, I heard myself say, even though every instinct was screaming at me not to. Okay, but we need to set a real deadline this time. A firm date when you're going to move out. And we need some ground rules. My food, my drinks, my clothes, those are off limits. Deal? He smiled at me, and it was warm and grateful. The smile I remembered from childhood when we'd sneak cookies before dinner, and he'd gotten caught. Deal, brother. Thanks for understanding. You're a good guy. I'll be out by the end of October. 2 months max. I promise. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. But as I watched him settle onto my couch with my beer, turning on the television to a sports channel like he'd lived here his entire life, something cold and sharp began to crystallize in my chest. A warning. A knowing. I just didn't listen to it. October melted into November without Brandon making any real moves toward leaving. The end of October deadline came and went like a ghost. Unacknowledged, hanging in the air between us like a bad smell we both pretended not to notice. I'd bring it up casually. Hey man, so about finding a new place? And he'd respond with vague promises about applications he was supposedly filling out, temp jobs that hadn't materialized, or complications with the custody arrangement that required him to stay in Arlington for now. Always a reason. Always a delay. By mid-November, my apartment had become unrecognizable. Brandon had stopped pretending to be a guest. His clothes hung in my closet alongside mine. His toiletries crowded my bathroom counter. And his stuff, boxes of old belongings, a duffel bag, random items he claimed were temporary, occupied the corners of my bedroom like permanent fixtures. He'd invited friends over twice without asking, left dishes in the sink for days, and had somehow convinced himself that my place was now his place too. The shift had happened so gradually, so insidiously, that I almost couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when my home stopped being mine. The worst part was that I let it happen. Every small boundary I failed to enforce became a brick in the wall of his entitlement. I was sitting at my desk at the engineering firm on a Thursday morning in mid-November when my mother called. Linda Turner had a sixth sense for family drama. She could smell dysfunction through a phone line from 200 miles away in Charlotte. I let it ring 3 times before answering, already knowing this wouldn't be a quick conversation. "Michael, honey, I've been trying to reach you for 2 weeks," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of maternal disappointment mixed with concern. "Why haven't you called me back? I've left 4 messages." "Mom, I've been busy with work. A big project in Falls Church. Brandon told me he's staying with you," she interrupted, cutting through my excuse like a hot knife through butter. "He called me last Sunday asking if I could send him some money for household expenses. Michael, what is going on down there? He was supposed to stay for a week." I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see my colleague Derek working on renderings for the same project. Normal. Everything outside my immediate situation looked normal. "It's complicated, Mom. He's going through the divorce with Jennifer. Custody stuff is messy. He doesn't have the resources to get his own place right now. And I couldn't just—" "You couldn't just what?" My mother's voice had taken on the sharp edge that meant she was already disappointed, and I hadn't even finished explaining. "You couldn't just say no? Michael, you have always been too soft, too accommodating. Sarah took advantage of that, and now your brother is taking advantage of that. When are you going to learn to put yourself first?" The irony was stinging because she was right. I knew she was right. Sarah had walked all over me during our marriage, spent money we didn't have, made decisions about our future without consulting me, and when I finally gathered the courage to suggest counseling, She'd laughed and told me to grow a spine. The divorce had cost me $60,000 in legal fees and left me emotionally hollowed out. I'd promised myself that I wouldn't let anyone manipulate me again. And then Brandon called, desperate, and I'd caved immediately. "I'll handle it," I said, with more confidence than I felt. "He'll be out by the end of the year. I'm going to set a firm deadline." After I hung up with my mother, I sat in my office for another hour, staring at blueprints without actually seeing them. My hands felt cold, even though the office was warm. Around 2 o'clock, I texted Brandon, "We need to talk tonight. Important." His response came back immediately. "Everything okay? Is something wrong?" I didn't respond. I was tired of explanations, tired of justifications, tired of being the reasonable one while everyone else got to be selfish. When I got home that evening at 6:30, I found Brandon in my living room, watching football with the volume turned up loud. My leather recliner, the one good piece of furniture I'd bought myself after the divorce, was occupied by his frame, his feet up, a bowl of chips balanced on his stomach. He'd ordered pizza without asking, and the empty box sat on my coffee table next to a stack of napkins and grease stains. "Hey, buddy," he said, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Had a good day? I was starving, so I grabbed some pizza. There's 2 slices left in the kitchen if you want them." Something inside me snapped. Not dramatically. There was no yelling, no thrown objects. It was quieter and colder than that. It was the snap of a man reaching the absolute end of his rope and realizing the rope had been cut long ago. "Brandon, we need to talk. Now." He sighed, as if I was being inconvenient, and muted the television. "Okay, what's up?" I sat down on the opposite end of the couch from him, maintaining a careful distance. "You need to move out, not eventually, not by the end of the year, by the end of this month, December 31st. That's 6 weeks. That's more than enough time to find a roommate situation, apply for apartments, or figure something out with Jennifer. But you cannot stay here anymore." Brandon's face shifted. The casual dismissal vanished, replaced by something harder, more calculated. He sat up straight and swung his legs off the recliner. "Come on, Mike. You're being unreasonable. I just started a new temp job. I'm trying to get my custody situation sorted out with Jennifer's lawyer. Moving right now would completely destabilize everything. Madison needs stability. I need stability." "You should have thought about that before you moved in without a plan," I said quietly. "You told me 2 weeks, maximum. It's been 2 months. I've been patient. I've been accommodating. But this is my home, Brandon. It's the one place in my life that's supposed to be mine. And I can't have that anymore because you've taken it over." He stood up abruptly, his jaw clenching. "You know what? You're right. You've been patient. You've been so incredibly patient and generous with your poor, struggling brother. And now you're throwing it in my face because you've decided you're done with me. That's cold, Mike. That's really cold." "It's not cold. It's reality. You've had 2 months to figure things out. 2 months. That's plenty of time, and you haven't done anything. You haven't looked for apartments. You haven't tried to reconcile with Jennifer. You haven't done anything except settle in like this is your permanent address. Because I can't afford anything else right now." His voice rose, and I could hear the desperation underneath the anger. "Do you know how much it costs to get an apartment in Northern Virginia? First month, last month, security deposit? I don't have that money. Jennifer's lawyer is bleeding me dry. I'm trying to maintain a relationship with my daughter, and it's costing me everything. I need help, Mike. Real help. Not this artificial deadline that's just going to push me out onto the street." I wanted to feel sympathetic. I wanted to be the person my mother had raised me to be, the person who helped family no matter what. But I was tired. Bone deep, soul-crushing tired. Tired of being used. Tired of my own needs always coming last. "Then figure it out," I said. "Apply for assistance. Call the county social services. Look for a roommate on Craigslist. Sleep in your car if you have to. But you're not staying here." "Wow. Okay. So that's how it is." Brandon grabbed his jacket from the back of the couch. "I'm going out. I'll be back later. And we can continue this conversation when you're in a better mood, because right now you're being incredibly selfish. He left, and I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the remnants of his presence. His pizza box, his napkins, the impression of his body still visible in my recliner. I felt hollow and sick, but I also felt something else underneath it. Resolve, finality. I should have known it wasn't over. I should have known that Brandon wouldn't accept this quietly. I didn't see him that night. I assumed he was staying elsewhere, maybe at a friend's place, and I tried not to feel guilty about that. I cleaned up the pizza box, scrubbed down the coffee table, and went to bed early. But sleep wouldn't come. I lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of Arlington outside my window, distant traffic, the hum of the HVAC system, and felt the weight of what was coming. Around midnight, I heard his key in the lock. He came home. The next morning, I woke to find that Brandon had made a move that changed everything. He'd called Jennifer, his ex-wife, and told her that he'd secured stable housing with me, his brother, in Arlington. He'd told her that Madison could stay with him on weekends now, that he was finally getting his life together. Jennifer had apparently been skeptical but willing. Anything that meant Brandon stepping up as a father was worth exploring. He texted me a screenshot of her response. "Fine. Let's try weekends starting next month. But if this is some kind of game, Brandon, I'm done." He'd also done something else, something that made my chest tighten when I realized what he'd done. He'd gone to the landlord's office in the complex and inquired about adding himself to my lease. He'd asked about tenancy rights in Virginia. He'd started laying the groundwork to make his stay permanent, legally binding, and impossible for me to undo without a formal eviction process. When I confronted him about it, he smiled. Not warmly, coldly, like someone who'd just realized he had the upper hand. "You said I had until the end of the year," he said. "But what you don't understand is that I'm not leaving. I can't leave. And now that I've told Jennifer that I'm stable, that Madison has a place to stay, I'm not going to be the guy who takes that away from her. So get used to it, brother. I'm not going anywhere." My mouth went dry. The apartment suddenly felt too small, too airless. I realized with a sinking certainty that I had no idea how to get him out. And neither did he. Yet, I sat in my apartment that night, staring at my phone, reading Brandon's words over and over. "Get used to it, brother. I'm not going anywhere." The casual cruelty of it struck me harder than any shouted argument could have. He wasn't angry. He wasn't desperate. He was confident. He'd made a calculation, and he decided that I didn't matter enough to stop him. I called my divorce attorney the next morning. Her name was Karen Whitmore, and she'd charged me $60,000 to untangle my marriage from Sarah. She was sharp, methodical, and she didn't believe in wasting time on pleasantries. When I explained the situation with Brandon, I could hear her typing on the other end of the line, already pulling up Virginia tenant law. "How long has he been there?" she asked. 2 months, since early September." "And you've never asked him to leave in writing?" "I asked him verbally, multiple times. He just ignored me." Karen exhaled, and I could picture her leaning back in her chair, already calculating billable hours. In Virginia, tenant rights are established pretty quickly once someone has occupied a space with the consent of the landlord, that's you, and established a residency. 2 months is more than enough time for a court to consider him a tenant, even without a formal lease. If you want him out, you're looking at a formal eviction process. That means filing with the court, serving him notice, waiting for the court date, and potentially dealing with an appeal. Minimum timeline? 60 to 90 days, depending on the court's docket. My stomach dropped. So he can just live here for another 3 months? Potentially longer if he contests the eviction. And Michael, I have to be honest with you. Judges don't like kicking family members out on the street, especially when there's a child involved. He mentioned his daughter, correct? He could argue that evicting him destabilizes her life. It's a sympathetic angle. You need to be prepared for this to get messy and expensive. After I hung up with Karen, I sat in my cubicle at the engineering firm, unable to focus on the Falls Church project. My hands felt numb. Brandon had essentially trapped me in my own home, and the legal system would side with him because he had a child and a sob story. The calculation had been perfect. He'd known exactly what he was doing when he called Jennifer and told her he was stable. He'd known that would make him harder to remove. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I called my mother, not for comfort or advice, for information. Mom, I need you to tell me everything about Brandon's finances. Does he have a job? Any savings? How much is Jennifer actually taking him for in child support? My mother hesitated. Michael, I don't think. Mom, please. Trust me, I need to know. She told me everything. Brandon had been working at a temp agency making $12 an hour, barely $800 a week after taxes. He had no savings. Jennifer's lawyer had filed for $1,000 a month in child support, which was actually on the lower end because Brandon's income was so minimal. But here was the thing that made me sit up straight. Brandon had told my mother that he was planning to take out a personal loan to help with legal fees, and that he was expecting some kind of settlement or inheritance from an old family friend who was dying. It was all fantasy. My mother knew it. I knew it. But Brandon had convinced himself it was real, which meant he was operating on borrowed time and borrowed money. I started documenting everything after that conversation. I took screenshots of text messages where Brandon asked to borrow money. I photographed the beer bottles he left around the apartment. I recorded the dates and times he had friends over. I noted when he used my gym membership and charged it to my account without asking. I saved every piece of evidence that proved he was living here, eating here, using my utilities, consuming the resources. On the 1st of December, I served him with formal notice. I had Karen draw up the document, an official notice to vacate, citing Virginia Code Section 55.1-1202. I printed it out, had it notarized at the bank down the street, and handed it to Brandon when he came home from his temp job. He read it standing in the kitchen, his jaw working, his hands trembling slightly. When he looked up at me, his expression had shifted into something cold and calculating. So this is how it's going to be. You're kicking me out right before the holidays, right before I'm supposed to have Madison for Christmas. That's real classy, Mike. That's real family. I asked you to leave for 2 months, I said quietly. You decided to stay. This is what happens when you don't respect boundaries. You know what? Fine, I'll leave. But I'm telling Jennifer everything. I'm telling her that you kicked me out, that you're unstable, that you can't be trusted around a child. I'm going to make sure that any custody arrangement gets revised. Madison isn't coming here anymore. You're going to be the bad guy in her life forever, and you're going to deserve it. He left the apartment that night, slamming the door so hard that the pictures on my wall rattled. I stood in the silence afterward, waiting to feel victorious. Instead, I felt empty and sick. He'd threatened Madison, his own daughter, as a weapon against me. The realization of how willing he was to hurt her, just to punish me, made my chest ache. But the story didn't end there. It got worse before it got better. Brandon didn't actually leave. He texted me 3 days later. I talked to a tenant rights lawyer. He said that 30 days notice isn't legal eviction without a court order. Your notice is void. I'm staying until you go through proper procedures. Have fun paying Karen more money. He was right. I hadn't gone through the court system. I'd served him notice, but notice alone doesn't constitute legal eviction in Virginia. You have to file with the court, wait for a hearing, get a judgment, and then you can actually remove someone. The notice was a first step, but it wasn't enough. I called Karen again. File the eviction, I told her. Whatever it costs. I don't care anymore. Over the next 6 weeks, the apartment became a war zone without any overt violence. Brandon stayed, but we barely spoke. He'd leave dishes in the sink to rot. He'd turn the temperature up to 78 degrees in the middle of winter, running up my electric bill. He'd invite his friends over late at night and play music until 2 or 3 in the morning. He was making the space unlivable, and he was doing it deliberately. The court date was set for January 15th. 2 weeks before that, something happened that broke the stalemate. I was working late at the office, reviewing structural drawings for a commercial development, when Derek, my colleague, approached my desk. He looked uncomfortable, like he was carrying bad news. "Hey man, I didn't know if I should tell you this, but I figured you'd want to know," he said, sitting down in the chair across from me. "I saw your brother at a bar in Arlington last night. The Brass Tap, you know the place? Anyway, he was there with a woman who wasn't his ex-wife, and they were pretty cozy, holding hands, leaning in close, kissing between drinks. I thought you should know. My first instinct was to not care. And then I realized what this meant. Brandon had told Jennifer he was stable, that he had a home and could provide Madison with a proper environment. But he was also spending time with another woman, which meant he was moving on faster than his custody arrangement accounted for. And if Jennifer found out that he was dating while claiming poverty and using his brother's apartment as his stable housing, it could change everything about the custody case. I didn't do anything with that information immediately. I sat with it, let it settle. I was thinking like a lawyer now, like Karen had taught me, gathering evidence, understanding leverage, knowing when to use information. The night before the court date, Brandon came home around 8 o'clock. He looked tired, and there was something defeated in his posture. He'd been served with an eviction summons, and he knew what was coming. He knew he was going to lose. We sat across from each other in the living room, and for the first time in weeks, we actually talked. Not argued, just talked. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I took advantage of you. I knew I was doing it, and I did it anyway because I was desperate and scared. Jennifer took everything, the house, the savings, most of the custody. She cleaned me out, Mike, and I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle being a failure, so I just stayed. I pretended like this was my home, like everything was going to work out, like if I just waited long enough, something would change. I listened to him, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. He wasn't evil. He was broken. He was a man who'd lost his marriage, his financial stability, and his sense of self, and he'd grabbed onto my apartment like it was a life raft. "You should have just asked," I said. "You should have told me the truth instead of lying and taking advantage of my goodwill." I know that now." He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "What happens tomorrow? The judge is going to rule in my favor. You're going to have to leave. But I'll give you time to find a place. A real deadline, not vague promises. 60 days. 2 months from tomorrow. I'll even help you look for apartments. We can figure this out like adults, like brothers." He nodded, and tears started streaming down his face. "What about Madison? What do I tell her?" "Tell her the truth, that her dad made a mistake, but he's going to fix it. That you're still her father, and you're still going to be in her life. But you're not going to lie to her about where you're living, or pretend like everything is fine when it's not." The court hearing was anticlimactic. The judge reviewed the evidence, the notice to vacate, the documentation of Brandon's occupancy, Karen's testimony about Virginia tenant law, and issued a judgment of eviction. Brandon didn't fight it. He didn't even hire a lawyer. He sat there in his Sunday best, looking small and defeated, and accepted that he'd lost. But here's where the story takes a turn that I didn't anticipate. 2 weeks after the court judgment, Jennifer called me. Her lawyer had discovered that Brandon was dating someone, a woman named Tanya, who worked at the temp agency. According to Jennifer, Brandon had been spending money on dates and dinners that he claimed he didn't have for child support. He'd been dishonest about his financial situation and his lifestyle. She was going to use it against him in the custody modification hearing. "I thought you should know," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Because if he loses custody, if Madison doesn't have a stable place to stay with him, that's on both of you. You kicked him out right before the holidays. You made him unstable, and now my daughter is going to suffer for it." I wanted to tell her that Brandon had made his own choices, that he'd lied to her about his living situation, that he'd threatened his own daughter as a weapon against me. But I didn't. I just listened, and then I called Brandon. "Jennifer knows about Tanya," I told him. "She's going to use it in the custody hearing." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Yeah, he finally said. I figured she would. I've been stupid about a lot of things, Mike. But I'm not going to be stupid about Madison. Tanya's been helping me figure things out. She helped me find an apartment, a one-bedroom in Crystal City. The rent is $1,200 a month, which is more than I can really afford right now. But it's mine. I'm moving in on the 15th, and I'm going to be honest with Jennifer about everything. No more lies, no more pretending. On January 15th, exactly 1 month after the court judgment, Brandon packed his belongings into boxes and garbage bags. I helped him carry them down to his car, a beat-up Honda Civic with a check engine light that had been on for 6 months. We didn't say much. There wasn't much left to say. He'd violated my trust, invaded my space, and tried to trap me into supporting him indefinitely. And I'd had to go to court and spend thousands of dollars to reclaim my own home. But there was also something else, a strange kind of sadness. He was my brother. We'd grown up together in Charlotte. We'd been close once, and now we were strangers loading boxes into a car in an Arlington parking lot. I hope things work out with Madison, I said as he was closing the trunk. He nodded. I hope so too. And Mike, I really am sorry. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it. You didn't deserve what I did to you. After he drove away, I went back inside my apartment. It was mine again. The living room was empty where his boxes had been stacked. The kitchen was quiet. The bedroom was just my bedroom, not a storage unit for his life. I sat on my couch and realized that I felt nothing at all. No triumph, no relief. Just a hollow emptiness where anger and fear used to be. It took 2 weeks for me to realize that Brandon had actually followed through. He'd moved to Crystal City, gotten a real job at the temp agency, and started paying his child support on time. Jennifer told me, through mutual acquaintances, that he was getting his life together, that he'd been honest with her about everything, that he was actually becoming the father Madison deserved. I never thanked him for leaving. He never asked me to. We texted occasionally, brief, cordial messages about nothing important. We were still brothers, but we were also just two men who'd learned a hard lesson about boundaries and consequences. The mortgage payments on my apartment continued. $2,100 a month, every month, for a home that was truly mine. And that felt like victory enough. Not because Brandon was gone, but because I'd finally learned to stand up for myself. Because I'd finally understood that saying no to someone you love isn't betrayal. It's survival.